Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
When I went in for Brahmin initiation, it went very beautifully. I thought I'd never understand this finger thing, and it was so clear when Prabhupada explained it. And I remember I didn't have anything to offer Prabhupada, and Leela Shakti was in front of me, and she had many roses, so she gave me one yellow rose to give to Prabhupada. And then when it was finished, I really felt overwhelmed how kind Srila Prabhupada was. So I said, Srila Prabhupada, you're very kind. And his face just lit up. I could not look at him with all that brilliance, really, and I kind of just bowed my head. And then when I raised my head back up, I saw kind of like a cloud. I didn't understand what it was, but it was Lord Balaram's appearance day. And Prabhupada had asked, because I'd cooked parathas the night before for Krishna, he said, would you cook parathas for my lunch? And I said, well, I'm cooking your lunch, I'll add that to it. So then I went back down to the kitchen, and it was chaos. You know, somebody spilled the hot syrup that was going into the huge halva, and I'm focusing as much as I can to make Prabhupada's lunch nice. And then Sam Shunder comes down, he says, Aditi, he says, Prabhupada wants to know why you've been cooking for him. And you're just now getting Brahmin. And I said, well, I don't know. Malati, she asked me to cook. And then back up, and then down again. And then I told him, and even I've been in charge of the kitchen. I wasn't even initiated. You know, I've been cooking for the deities. So actually, Prabhupada made a very clear statement that only Brahmins can cook for the deities and for the spiritual master. And so it was you know, in the meantime, it's Lord Balaram's appearance day. There's thunder and lightning outside, and it was like very heavy in a way, but very, you know, instructive also.
So it was at the La Cienega Temple, early January, February. And Vishnu John, he wasn't a Swami yet, he was a brahmachari, and Srimati and Kausalya, they made rod puppets. They were beautiful. And we would go to Griffith Park on early Sundays. And they would take the puppets out, and they would put on just a sort of a little improv puppet show to attract the people in the park. And then we would pass out invitations for everybody to come to the free Sunday love feast. So one day, they were going to put on the puppet show, and it was a puppet show of the life of Prahlad Maharaj, and Srila Prabhupada came. And he came in, they put a special seat for him, and he sat down, and this was the first time I was ever seeing Prabhupada in such an informal setting. So the puppet show started, and Vishnu John, he wrote this and sang this little song that would be Prahlad singing, and it would be something like, if you like singing, Krishna says you can sing for him, and if you like dancing, and he would say, do you like dancing? And everybody would say yes, and he would say, Krishna says you can dance for him, and it went on like that. So I looked over to see how the Jagat Guru, you know, who I had fear and awe and reverence for, how he was reacting to this puppet show. And when Vishnu John started singing, Prabhupada lit up. He was smiling, his grin was so huge, and he started laughing. And I saw that there was this side where Srila Prabhupada had this innocence and this childlike quality that he could enjoy just like regular people, even though it wasn't in the way that we enjoyed, but it just touched my heart to see him laughing and enjoying this puppet show. So it was very, very sweet. The first really sweet experience of seeing Prabhupada, not being on the Vyasasana as the heavy with knowledge guru.
So it was 1974, and my husband and I, Ballavanta and I, went to the Chicago Rath Yatra where Prabhupada was presiding. And he, in his lecture, explained to the audience why Lord Jagannath came to the United States. And he said, actually, Lord Jagannath has come to your country because Jesus Christ was a great devotee of Lord Jagannath. And he further explained that actually it does not matter which names of God that you chant. You can chant the names of Christ or you can chant the names of Krishna. The important thing is to chant the names of God. And so that was his way of letting everyone in the audience know that chanting the holy names of God is for everyone, regardless of what your denomination is.
So the first time that I saw Srila Prabhupada come in, I was immediately struck with how short he was. Because every time we see Srila Prabhupada, he's so grandly sitting there in his asana. Pictures are so, he's such a huge person in our lives. And I saw that he was shorter than Hridayananda Maharaj. I was amazed. Anyway, aside from that, he got on the Vyasasana in the foyer there at one particular point. And he would speak more in the evening there. He didn't speak the Bhagavatam class in the morning, he would speak in the evening. So one of the very first times I had some real contact with him personally was sitting on that Vyasasana, regally majestically sitting on his Vyasasana. And he's looking out at the devotees. Just like, and it was just like that, it's the glance story. So he's looking out at all the devotees in the room, just a momentary eye contact with every single person, but you could feel it. I could feel it, just like the sun comes out behind a really dark cloud. You could feel Srila Prabhupada's glance. And I hadn't experienced that or had heard of others. I mean, now we've hear it plenty of times. But when Prabhupada glanced at me, time stopped. And there was this connection from deep back in eternal time, this dark, dark tunnel to me of eternal time, and there was this connection in our eyes just for that split second. And from where, I don't know, these tears just gushed up. They were down. The tears were down there in that tunnel, and they just gushed up and out my eyes, and I was ecstatic, sad, and surprised, unashamed, ashamed, everything all at once when that connection was there. And I felt that connection with Prabhupada from way back. Not that there was anything specific about the connection. Oh, we were friends, oh, we were nothing like that at all. But there was a connection of mercy from Srila Prabhupada from way back. And those tears just gushed out of my eyes. And then, boop, split second, she's on to the next person. I mean, it was a split second, but it was like 5 hours or whatever. So at that, one of those times when Prabhupada was there in the Vyasasana to give class, the foyer was situated in such a way that to the left side or to the right side was the door to the kitchen. And I was sitting near that door, and all of a sudden the door opens and out comes, lo and behold, the cook who's supposed to be cooking the evening offering, who decides, I'm not going to cook this offering. I'm going to come out to hear my spiritual master speak. And I thought, okay, we know what that means. So then I go in and cook the offering. We didn't have speakers, I don't know. It wasn't before electricity, although it was quite some long time. We didn't have speakers in the kitchen. Anyway, I missed the whole class. Anyway, I'm there cooking in the kitchen, and Prabhupada's giving this wonderful class, I'm sure. But after the class, by then the offering's getting offered on the altar, And in those days, we used to keep the plate on the altar during the offering, obviously, but also during the artik. So Prabhupada finished his class. It was still the offering time, but he went into the temple room, which was empty, and paid his full dandavats in front of the deities, and we opened the curtains so that Prabhupada could, even though it was the offering, so that Prabhupada could see the deities and get darshan. And he took darshan very respectfully of the deities, went upstairs, and then a few minutes later, the artik is started, Sita's doing the artik, I'm in the kitchen still. Shrutakirti comes down and said, Srila Prabhupada wants to taste the offering. And I said, but Prabhu, the plates are still on the altar. He said, well, go get them. Okay, so then I go in on the altar and I take one. They had beautiful marble plates in Mexico, big oval, heavy, but beautiful marble plates. And I pick up one marble plate. Sita's there doing the offering. Oh, no, no, no. And I'm going, Prabhupada wants one of the plates. I want to taste the offering. I just take one plate off, and we put on a plate and we give some to Srila Prabhupada. And the next day, Shrutakirti said, Prabhupada liked the offering. He thought it was very nice. And I thought, so it's just one of these things how you see so many things in your life. Now you look back and you think, oh, that was, at the initial, like when the devotee comes out and says, I'm not going to cook. And you think, oh, no, my bad luck. But actually, it was a great blessing. But you don't see that usually right away. But you can see it in retrospect.
So the next time we saw Prabhupada, which is usually the way it worked, there would be a year serving Prabhupada, and there would be a week or 2 weeks seeing Prabhupada, being with Prabhupada in the summer. So it's 1972, Prabhupada comes to Fontenay Rose. In the meantime, our temple in Geneva was closed, several other temples were closed, and Prabhupada wasn't happy. And so on that visit, the first thing that happened was we had planted some tulsis, and in Prabhupada's, we had kept them in Prabhupada's room. We moved them out, and we had also had Radha Krishna deities, which we thought Prabhupada will install this visit. So what happened was, first thing, Prabhupada is walking through the tulsi, the room before his room, and he says, oh, who is this? And we all go, oh, Tulsi Prabhupada. Especially, I was very proud, we had gotten Tulsi to come. And Prabhupada looks, he goes, oh, Tulsi's cousin. So before we knew it, all the so-called Tulsis were out in the yard. They weren't Tulsis, they were, I guess, a form of basil. The devotee from Africa had sent the seeds saying, these are Tulsi, we planted them, and every day doing Tulsi puja, the whole thing. But the second thing that happened was Prabhupada was upset about this temple being closed, and I was feeling somewhat responsible. So I was cleaning Prabhupada's room, and he went out for a walk. And I had a big pile of dirt not a big pile, but a pile of dirt right by the doorway. And within 10 or 15 minutes after I started, Prabhupada was coming back. I guess he wasn't feeling well. So he came up the stairs, and he looked at the little pile, and he said, you can continue. And it was a very small room. I felt very conscious about being so close to Prabhupada. But what was going on in my head was, should I talk to Prabhupada about, the relationship between husband and wife, following regulative principles? It was very disturbing, the whole thing to me. And it went back and forth in my head. I'm alone with Prabhupada, I should ask him. And I couldn't bring myself to ask him. And then the next thing I know, Prabhupada asked if I could hand him the beads from the radiator, because there were initiations that day. So I picked up the beads and I looked down, and Prabhupada was sitting very low. I handed them to him, and Prabhupada looked up and he said, and I knew this was the moment I could talk to him, and I couldn't ask him. And he looked and he said, chant Hare Krishna. So I began chanting, and I finished my work, and I thought, the answer will come to me. I can't disturb Prabhupada about grihastha affairs,
It was 1970. I don't remember what month we moved into the new temple on Watsika Avenue, but there was, where the existing temple room is now, there was a sanctuary, because the the building had been a church. And there were regular seats in the sanctuary. Not only regular seats, but there was a church organ. So Srila Prabhupada really liked that there were these seats, especially for guests who would come on Sundays to the feast. And there were beautiful stained glass windows. And one day, Vishnu John, still not a Swami, after the Sunday feast, and everybody would be so intoxicated, and we were sitting in the chairs, he or somebody would speak, then he got up and he sat down at the organ and he began to play, and we had a kirtan. Well, we were into the kirtan, and you know, Srila Prabhupada's quarters are upstairs in the back, and there's a stairwell, and it comes down and there's a door, which always from the inside was locked. And all of a sudden, the door opened up, and Srila Prabhupada was standing there. And he came out like this. He put his arms up, and he began to dance. And he motioned to all of us to stand up and dance. We all stood up on the seats of those chairs. And Prabhupada was just, he was just beaming, and he was singing, and he was dancing, and everybody went completely wild. I mean, totally wild. And Vishnu John was just playing on that organ. And you know how loud the pipes of an organ can be. It was the most ecstatic kirtan. And I had never seen Srila Prabhupada dance before. And it was like he was floating. His feet weren't on the ground. And I know devotees have said that at Rath Yatra, the year when he was dancing at Rath Yatra, it was the same thing. He was Vaikuntha man. He just absolutely was, he just picked us all up, and we became absorbed in the ecstasy of Prabhupada, what he was feeling. It just transmitted through every single one of us into our hearts, and we just were out of our bodies. Prabhupada transformed us like that. It was beautiful, really beautiful.
Being in the darshan with Srila Prabhupada, and one in particular, evening darshan, some Indian guests had come, and there was some chit-chat, and one of the ladies gave Prabhupada a little trinket kind of bracelet. It was just kind of string, but with some flowers, real flowers on it. And it was a particular day when sisters give to their brothers something like that, as I think to increase their longevity and as a sign of love. So this family gave that to Prabhupada, and he put it on, he wore it. But, and at the same time, you know, Prabhupada would turn the conversation from chit-chat, he would turn it to Krishna consciousness and the importance of taking seriously, especially they being Indians. It's their responsibility to spread Krishna consciousness. So it was my service to clean Prabhupada's room. So the next day when Prabhupada was on his walk, I noticed this little bracelet. The flowers are wilted, but it's in Prabhupada's garbage can. And I said, oh, I will keep this. It will remind me of this wonderful room conversation. And that story, and in the next one I'm going to tell, Prabhupada and his room conversations, it was always to teach us how to preach. That was always the feeling I got. I never said anything. I just listened and took it all in. But another example was in Paris. We had two elderly people coming, and nobody took very much time. They weren't going to move into the temple and be devotees, and we put it up on our scorecard, we made a devotee. But Prabhupada, this one evening, he invited both of them, Mr. Wagner, and I don't remember the lady's name, to sit right down in front of him, and we were all in the back. And just one thing after the other, he's preaching to them. Now they're at the last stage of their life. Now is the time to become Krishna conscious. And actually, Mr. Wagner, he was chanting 16 rounds. He started going to Vrindavan every year. And, but it was also to teach us, don't don't think everybody is ready for Krishna consciousness, especially the elderly. Give them Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada was showing us how to do that. So that was very nice.
It's 1971, the year I was initiated, and my husband and I went to Boston from Atlanta for my initiation, and Prabhupada was there. And before the initiation, he had a class with all the devotees present, and he asked, "What are the 10 offenses?" So Jadharani raised her hand, and she said, "Well, Prabhupada, the first offense is to not blaspheme the pure devotee of the Lord." And Prabhupada checked her and said, "No." He said, "Any devotee who is sincerely chanting the holy names and trying to spread the holy names," he said, "they should not be criticized in any way." So then there, in relation to this, Prabhupada said, when one devotee asked, "Well, Prabhupada, how can we repay you?" And Prabhupada said, "Actually, the disciple cannot repay the spiritual master." He said, "But if you want to try to repay the spiritual master," he said, "you can do that by preaching." And then he explained how there's 4 ways of preaching. One can preach by his life, one can preach by example, and one can preach with his words or with money. So my understanding was that any devotee who is sincerely preaching in whatever the capacity they're wanting to preach and spread Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, there should be no criticism. And actually the Vaishnava, he avoids any kind of criticism, but especially to criticize another Vaishnava is very much to be avoided. And so Prabhupada really wanted to illustrate that point, that we don't, not only do we not blaspheme the pure devotee, but any devotee who's sincerely trying to preach Lord Chaitanya's movement and spread the holy names should not be criticized.
I'm not sure if it was 1973 or 74. It was in the old temple room. I don't remember what year it was changed over to the new one. The Vaikunta players, a few of them came to Los Angeles. So it must have been 73. And they were doing dance dramas. So they choreographed the story of the killing of Pralambasura. And it was decided that there would be a private viewing only for Srila Prabhupada in the temple room. And because I had my young daughters, I couldn't participate in that aspect, so they invited me to be the music and play the mridanga, to be the musical accompaniment. So we gathered in the temple room, and Prajapati, he did the narration, reading from Prabhupada's Krishna book. Prabhupada sat on the Vyasasana, and I sat right down on the floor at the bottom of Prabhupada's Vyasasana with the mridanga. And as Prajapati began to narrate the pastime of the killing of Pralambasura, the dancers then were playing the parts of the cowherds boys and Balaram. And I think when the time came, I don't remember if it was Prajapati or who it was Pralambasura, but and I would sneak up looks at Srila Prabhupada in between while I was singing Govinda Jaya Jaya and different short bhajans in between when they would just do pure dance. And I would look up at him. And when Balaram killed Pralambasura, and of course Balaram was on the back of a male dancer, and he took his fist and he struck him. I looked up at Prabhupada at that moment, and the look on Srila Prabhupada's face was another one of those looks like when he was watching the puppet show, but it was even more expressive. He was totally there, seeing Balaram punch and kill Pralambasura. And I just thought, wow, Prabhupada has the vision to actually enter into the pastime straight from the Krishna book that he translated so that we could all enjoy these amazing pastimes of the Supreme Lord. But Prabhupada, he was right in there, and he enjoyed it so much. And I remember that Prabhupada said, like he said, the paintings were the windows to the spiritual world, and he said that the dramas made his books come to life. So that was a very special moment for me to be sitting there, getting to play the mridanga and sing, and Prabhupada, you know, for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada, but getting to be a part of that pastime. It was a very momentous time for me. I was very grateful.
So another story that happened, another little incident, it was a small little incident. So and anyone who's been around where Srila Prabhupada comes, there's lots of activity, extra service, extra work, extra visitors, extra mess. So one day we hear, Srila Prabhupada's going to do a tour of the temple, clean up all your areas. He's coming down in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes, what to do? So it seems to me, my experience in all the temples that I've been, that it's an age-old Hare Krishna practice, that anybody who makes a garland for Srila Prabhupada goes to the flower bucket and picks off the flowers that they want and leaves the stems and the half-picked flowers in the bucket. So you've got buckets of half-picked flowers and so many things. And that was in that same foyer, well, not the foyer where Prabhupada spoke, but the entrance to the kitchen. The door would open, there was what are those parting doors? Two doors that would open into the kitchen, a little pantry area, and then you'd go into the kitchen. So that pantry area had all the flowers and everything that we had, the buckets of flowers, all picked over, messy, everything. So I said, 5 minutes, he's coming. So I squished all the buckets to the side behind the two doors so that, you know, you come in and your visual is, at least straight ahead of you, is somewhat organized kitchen. So it doesn't take much to guess what Prabhupada did. When he came in, he opened the doors and immediately turned right around to the right and looked down at the buckets of the half-picked over flowers and said, "Who has done this?" And with great delight, all the devotees said, "The pujaris have done this, Srila Prabhupada." And Srila Prabhupada said, "These pujaris should be replaced." So, quite a crushing blow, but amazingly enough, and maybe it is actually also shows how dull I was, I didn't feel crushed at all by it. I didn't feel crushed. It was just like, it was just another like ecstatic happening or relationship with Srila Prabhupada. And I'll also admit, I knew that they weren't going to just replace me because they didn't have anybody to replace me with. That easy. Anyway, so Prabhupada said, "These pujaris should be replaced." And then he goes further on into the kitchen, and in the kitchen there's a big pot on the stove, on a candy stove. So the candy stove is not elevated off the floor very much. The candy stove is, say, like 1.5, 2 feet off the floor, and then a pot that's on top of that. So maybe it's like 4 feet tall. But then again, Srila Prabhupada, being his stature that he was, he had to stand on his little, he had to stretch a little bit. Maybe he wasn't probably on his tiptoes, but still he had to stretch. He looked into the pot and said, "What is this?" And the devotee said, I don't know. Anyway, the devotee said, "It's lentils, Srila Prabhupada. Lentils, it's for the breakfast." Prabhupada said, "Lentils are for horses." And we had little stories like that, little tidbits of nectar like that when Prabhupada walked around.
I remember one class, that was when Prabhupada was saying how much money we had spent to come. And I thought, this is strange for Prabhupada to be talking about how much money we had spent. And he calculated how many we were and how much it cost. I think he came up with $200,000 we had spent to come to Vrindavan. And then he said, this is very good use of money because you have come to Vrindavan, and whatever you do in Vrindavan, that is multiplied 1,000 times.
So this was Kartik of 1972 in Vrindavan. And my husband and I at that time, we took our twin daughters who were 14 months old to India. And we were going to stay and live in India. He was going to do spiritual sky import business with Manibandha in Calcutta. But first we went to Vrindavan because Srila Prabhupada was there. So we arrived, and another devotee came with us. His name was Haridas. He's deceased now. So we got there, and the devotees took us in to, Prabhupada was staying at Radha Damodar, and they took us in, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, so Krishna has brought you here." And I thought, wow, I never thought like that. Krishna actually brought us here to Vrindavan. And he said, have you taken prasadam? I said, no, Prabhupada. And he said, you're following Ekadasi? I said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I'm sorry, I forgot. I said, the devotees from London, they had given us some bread, and when we were standing in the line to get permission to come into the country, I said my children were hungry, and I gave them some, and I forgot, and I ate some also. I said, I'm so sorry. And Prabhupada said, Shruti Kirti, give them some sweets. Where I thought that, oh my God, he's going to say I'm going to hell. I've committed the most abominable sin imaginable. But he just totally just dismissed it and said to his servant, give them some sweets, like that. So that showed me how, even though breaking Ekadasi is such a very heavy thing, because it was unintentional and because it was innocent on my part, Prabhupada was just very, very merciful and very compassionate, and he didn't chastise me. So I felt a lot of mercy and a lot of love in that lesson of realizing that up the road, if anything like that should happen in exchanges with devotees, to let them know that when it's unintentional. And he didn't say, oh, follow the next day. Later on we learned that. If you break Ekadasi, follow it the next day. But there was not even any mention. And that was the most relaxed I had ever seen him, because we know later on he said Vrindavan was his home. So with the no shirt on, back in the chair with his hands behind his head, I got to see yet another side of Prabhupada that I had never seen except in the little performances when he was very childlike. But here he was just totally in his element at home in the holy Dham of Vrindavan. It was very wonderful.
I remember one particular evening, Prabhupada, I was sitting behind Yamuna, and he was saying to Yamuna, I want you to come, I want all of you to come, and I want you to live. I thought he said here at the ranch. He called it the ranch. And Yamuna, she said, but Prabhupada, where will we stay? Because there were 4 shacks, the open air kitchen, and those were all occupied. He said, you will stay in my house, like that. So then Yamuna was a little bit resisting maybe, and I think it's because, it was very ecstatic to be at Radha Damodar temple and to be where Prabhupada, near to where Prabhupada had stayed for so long. And then Prabhupada, he was laughing, he says, I am Balaram, and I am dragging the Yamuna, like that. He got a real kick out of teasing her like that. So sure enough, you know, within a few days, after Prabhupada left, we moved into his house, and we actually stayed in the kitchen of his complex there. And most of the devotees had left. I remember Rukmini was with Bardraj. He was painting. The deities were in the house also. Radha Shamsundar, Gaurnitai, Krishna Balaram. And Bardraj was painting all of them. And then Rukmini had been somewhat ill. And so he had said, now I think, you know, you should go, the two of you should go back to the States when he's finished painting. So Prabhupada was always, you know, taking care of the devotees, making sure they were getting the care they needed, like that.
Well, it was 1973 or 74, and Ballavanta was running for mayor of Atlanta. And one of the letters from Prabhupada, he was very much appreciating his preaching. And he said, yes, this is what I want, and I'm so pleased with you because you are preaching as it is without compromising the philosophy. And he said, never mind that you don't get many votes. That does not matter. He said, when one tries to shoot the rhinoceros, if he does not shoot the rhinoceros, no one criticizes because they say, oh, who can shoot the rhinoceros anyways? But then if one does shoot the rhinoceros, then that is very nice also. So either way, it does not matter, just that you are trying your best for Krishna. That's what's important, and that's very pleasing to me. So I remember that one. Because sometimes I feel like, oh, you know, I'm not doing so much to help Prabhupada. But then when I think of that instruction, that just so long as I'm trying my best, that Prabhupada's pleased, and that's all that matters. And he appreciates it. You know, that's what counts. Maybe no one else appreciates, but Prabhupada appreciates. That's the important thing.
So after we ended up living in Calcutta, it became end of 72, then beginning of 73. Things were a little challenging, and I had this intense desire to want to go to Mayapur because I had the name Chaitanya Dasi, so I wanted to go to where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared. So we heard a rumor that Garga Muni had vacated the hut he had built for himself there. And it actually had one electrical outlet and one light bulb. So I begged and pleaded, please, please, let's go to Mayapur. So we took the train and we went to Mayapur, and we moved into the little hut with a mud floor. And there were just 5 devotees living there then, 5 brahmacharis. Was Jayapataka Swami in 1973? I don't remember. Anyway, he was plowing the fields, and after some time, it was brought to our attention that the men weren't happy having a grihasta couple living there. So we were told that Prabhupada wanted to speak with my husband. Well, in Calcutta. He refused. So he said, you go. I'll take care of the girls. You go. So Smarahari and Smarahari took care of the couple of cows that were there. And we went to Calcutta. So I got there, and they said, what are you doing here? I said, well, Prabhupada wants to speak to us. Not you, your husband. Go back. I said, no. I came all the way here. At least I'm going to stay a couple days. So I got to go on a couple of programs. Prabhupada spoke at the Lions Club, and I don't remember anything that he said, but I was allowed to bring him his glass of water like that. So then went back to Mayapur, told my then husband, Prabhupada wants to speak to you. We have to go. So we went. He finally relented. And when we got there, Prabhupada's room was his office, in Calcutta. It's still there. We went in, and in there were 3 sannyasi godbrothers also sitting down. So we sat down, and Prabhupada began asking what we were doing and what was the problem. And mainly, the men didn't want to give any of the milk from the cows extra because having 2 children. So the complaint was that we didn't really have an income. And so Prabhupada began kind of a back and forth discussion. Well, he could learn to make coal, mridanga, like in Navadvip. And that way then he could make the mridangas and they could be shipped to other temples, and he could get some kind of income. So then the one godbrother, sannyasi godbrother, said, "Nah, Prabhupada, nah, that wouldn't work, not possible." He said, "They should go back to America." I said, "But we came on a one-way ticket, and how could we go?" He said, "You just go to the government, you get repatriated, you give them your passport." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "It means you can never come back to India." So Prabhupada was sitting there, very, very thoughtfully. I looked at him thinking, okay, please get us out of this mess. What are we going to do? So then Prabhupada, I remember this was early 73, he said, Mayapur is meant for sannyasis, brahmacharis, and vanaprasthas. Householders are meant to support the temple, not be supported by the temple. Therefore, you should become independent, completely independent of the temples. And that was it. And then we got up and walked out of the room. I thought, we've been kicked out of ISKCON. I didn't know what to think. Where are we going to stay? How are we going to live? Anyway, it took a while to understand that Prabhupada was setting a precedent that householders should not journey off to India on a one-way ticket with young children and think that any temple is going to provide for them. So it was very, very heavy, but I was able to process it and understand the lesson that Srila Prabhupada was giving.
Vrindavan, 1974, after the festival, were just a few devotees. Vanmalini and Pranav, they're Bengali disciples of Srila Prabhupada, both in their 50s. Maybe Pranav might even be in his 60s. And the few mornings that Prabhupada was there, she would offer herself Guru Puj to Prabhupada, singing and smiling, and Prabhupada would be smiling. They were both so happy. And then Prabhupada, when we'd be walking or whatever, Prabhupada would tease Pranav, "Oh, Pranav, you can't take sannyas. You should take sannyas, but you're too attached to your wife's cooking." He would tease him all the time. And then at one point, it was May 19th, Prabhupada was coming back from somewhere, wherever he'd been. There had been a month or two he wasn't there since the spring festival. And it just happened that that was Yamuna's birthday. So Yamuna was in ecstasy. So all day long we waited and we waited and we waited. Tejas was supposed to bring him from Delhi. And finally, Madhura and Yamuna started a kirtan. We were just 5 or 6 devotees in the room, and they really got into chanting, and their eyes were closed. And I've got my eyes open looking to see if there are any lights, because it was dark now. And there were no cars on the road. You didn't see a car then. And finally I saw the lights, and I saw the lights turn off the main road down to the little side road to come to Prabhupada's house. And I was trying to tell them, but their eyes were closed. It was kirtan. Nobody paid any attention to me, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to greet Prabhupada. And before I knew it, the door opened, and there was Prabhupada with this huge smile on his face. He was so happy that they were involved in kirtan. And he just like, you know, they kind of were so surprised to see Prabhupada there. And with Prabhupada came his first disciple, who was a Sanskrit scholar. Somebody knows his name, I don't know his name. And I think his wife and Tejas, who had driven down. And it was already 9 o'clock at night, something like that. So Prabhupada sat down in his chair, and he was very happy. And he said, now I want full prasad, he said, for myself and for my guests. So, and he wanted it in 45 minutes. And I thought, 45 minutes? You know, that's impossible. But Madhura and I helped Yamuna and Van Malini. We were the vegetable cutters. And with the pressure cooker, help. You know, there was full prasad, dal, rice, sabji, chapatis, the whole thing for Prabhupada and his guests. And yeah, Prabhupada was very pleased with how they had done that. And I don't know if it was during this time, but at one point, Yamuna didn't understand that I had seen Prabhupada all these other times. When she left London, Prabhupada hadn't come. So at some point, Yamuna says, oh, Aditi, I'm going to take you in and introduce you to Prabhupada. And I kind of said, well, you know, I felt a little funny. So we go in, and Prabhupada's at his table, and I'm sitting down at the table, and oh, she says, Prabhupada, this is Aditi. And Prabhupada looks real puzzled. He says, France, or he said Europe. He knew me, you know, like kind of wondering why, you know, Yamuna's doing that. Anyway, there was a little bit of discussion, and then we left. But another really nice thing, and I don't remember exactly when this happened, but I brought a tape recorder from France. So someone had arranged that I could go in and talk with Prabhupada. And I think this devotee from South India also went in. And I didn't realize it. I mean, you have to be a special person to know how to talk with Prabhupada. When I got in there, I didn't have a word to say. I didn't have a question to ask. And that devotee didn't either. It wasn't like Yogeshwar was there and he could make conversation and questions. So my tape recorder's going round and round, and Prabhupada, the curtains are drawn because it's hot, you know, and Prabhupada's sitting in his chair and looking around, just waiting for us to say something. And I didn't know what to say, you know. And I was getting to be very uncomfortable. And then all at once I heard this, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And I saw Prabhupada's face light up, and I turned around, and there was Krishna Das Babaji, Prabhupada's godbrother. And I think maybe also Muni Maharaj, the one he took sannyas with. And they were just in their, like little loincloths. And they just bubbled into the room chanting Hare Krishna, and then Prabhupada's face lit up. They offered obeisances to each other. And then Prabhupada started to tell them about how many books were being distributed. And it's funny because I don't know whether it was in English or Bengali or Hindi. I understood what Prabhupada was saying, but it might have been because it was numbers, you know, so many lakhs. But since then I've heard that Krishnadas Babaji did speak English. I used to see him sometimes at Imli Tala. He was the beloved of all the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, wherever he went. Like he would lead evening kirtan at Imli Tala. And after he'd finish, all the widows, you know, the ladies would just loved him, you know, and everybody, wherever he went, you know, he was very much, he was really a Babaji and just chanting all the time. Sometimes he'd be out near Nandagram, sometimes he'd be in Vrindavan. But it was so sweet to see how he and how happy they made Prabhupada. Here was Prabhupada, so heavy and serious, and then when he saw them, I thought, this is how nice it is to become elderly in Krishna consciousness, just chanting Hare Krishna and having devotee association, and it was very special. I don't know whatever happened to that tape, you know, but it was really a sweet moment to see Prabhupada interact with his godbrothers like that. So loving towards each other like that.
One of my favorite stories, the one that had the most impact on me, was when Srila Prabhupada was giving a darshan. Now, he would do that every day, but I didn't tune into that. I, had Didi, their schedule and cooking schedule and this and that. And I just was not so conscious of those things. But one day, Nanda Maharaj said, Nanda, why don't you and Sita come up to the darshan this afternoon? And I thought, wow, I never thought of that. So we go up to the darshan, and this is a darshan where it had been arranged by the devotees that Prabhupada would meet with the Cardinal of Mexico. It was a very big darshan. But the Cardinal was too unfortunate and didn't come. He just sent 2 representatives, 2 little peons, 2 priests. And these priests were particularly dull-headed. So by the time we got into the darshan room was full, and we, of course, sat in the very, very, very back. And we're looking at everybody's heads, and Prabhupada's up there, and the 2 gentlemen are sitting on chairs, and Prabhupada's sitting on his low desk in the front. And Prabhupada's not even interacting with these gentlemen, personally. He's having, I think it was Pushta Krishna Maharaj, I believe, who was there with him, and Pushta Krishna Maharaj is reading a letter from the BBT party of how many standing orders of books they sold. Iowa University took 3 standing orders, and Minnesota took, and I'm thinking, okay, nice. And, it's going on, it's dry, it's very dry, and we're just sitting there. And then Prabhupada, he speaks. After some time, he speaks, and he gives a very brief description of Krishna consciousness, only covering 4 regulative principles. We follow this, we do this, we do this. And when he got to no meat eating, he made a comment, and this bullfighting, it must be stopped. Now, by that time, I probably had been in Mexico for 6 months, 8 months, maybe a year. I'm a little foggy on details, but for quite some time, I had no clue they had bullfighting in Mexico. I just thought it was only in Spain. Anyway, so Prabhupada had been there 1 day, 2 days, and he said, this bullfighting is very sinful, and you must stop it. And then you just briefly touched on the point there, and then went on to another point, and he mentioned how Jesus Christ is our guru. You can give us your churches. We can preach from the Bible about Krishna consciousness because we accept Christ as our guru, this and that. And then the men, they asked their questions to Prabhupada. They kind of got fidgety. Very quickly they got fidgety. They asked questions, and Prabhupada, and they said, the first question was, are there any young people in your movement? And Prabhupada, look in front of you. Look in front of you. They're all young people. Oh, maybe they hadn't noticed, whatever. And then he had one lady, Lakshmi Priya, I believe her name was, a Mexican-bodied girl who lived in Los Angeles. He had her speak. Tell them about Los Angeles. How it's a big church, and how it was empty, and now it's full of devotees, this, that. And then they looked at their watch and said, oh, thank you, sir, or thank you, but we have to go now. We have another engagement, and thank you for your time. If we have any questions, can we come and ask you? Prabhupada again gestured to all his devotees there. If you are very sincere, you can talk with me, but you can speak with them if you have any questions. And they said again, thank you, and they got up and left the room. But it felt like, so they got up, left the room, and it felt like that the man must have still had his hand on the door handle, but on the outside of the door, shutting the door, because the door just clicked. And Prabhupada broke into a big smile and a big laugh. He said, oh, not a big laugh, but, a chuckled. He chuckled. These are not true Christians. He said, did you notice? As soon as I said they had to stop their bullfighting, they left. And, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together, but for sure it was just like that. As soon as he mentioned that, a couple more things, and then they left. So then it got very sweet and very warm and very interesting. So at that time in South America, what had happened was Hanuman he was at least my first experience of a sannyasi who left that order and took Grihastha ashram. So that was like major at the time. And because he had been in Argentina preaching, and that's where Sita and Jagajivan had been, and so Sita and Jagajivan were my friends, and then he had trouble with them, therefore I immediately, just like it said in Prahlad's story, friends and enemies, I just immediately identified with my friends, and this person is not my friend because he's not friends with my friends. Anyway, so I had an attitude, I admit. And so he says, Prabhupada, should we put a picture of Jesus Christ on our altar? You said he was our guru. Should we put a picture of Jesus Christ on our altar and worship him? Prabhupada said, I have not said that. I have not said that. And then he asked another question. He asked, and this was, okay, just to get you focused in on the time, this was before Chaitanya Charitamrita had been published, so we had heard some of the stories, but we weren't so familiar with all of the stories. So he said to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, I want to know if you've rejected me, just like Lord Chaitanya rejected Chota Haridas. So there I am in the back of the room thinking, now Prabhupada's really going to give it to him, and he's going to get really the sauce for all the trouble that he's caused and all the anxiety. I'm really glad he asked that question because no one else could give it to him like Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, no, I have not rejected you. He said, Lord Chaitanya was God, and he can spread this movement all around the world, all by himself. But I am not God, and I am totally dependent on you for the help that you've given me. And I was like floored just to see how compassionate and how much love Srila Prabhupada had for all of us. And so, because the gentlemen had left, the two priests had left, some devotees had escorted them out also, to give them prasadam and take care of their needs or whatever. So at a certain point around this time, Hridayananda Maharaj turns around and he motions to Sita and I to come forward, because there's a space now in front of Prabhupada's desk. So we grabbed that opportunity and came forward, and we sat right at the corner of Srila Prabhupada's desk. And he continues to talk about Jesus Christ and Christianity. And so Sita, she had a question for Prabhupada, and she said, because Prabhupada made the point how Jesus Christ couldn't save his followers. He couldn't save his followers because his followers were so degraded. And so that just brought a question into my mind, how he couldn't save his followers. He's a pure devotee, Prabhupada's a pure devotee, why couldn't he save his followers? So Sita asked, Srila Prabhupada, why couldn't Jesus Christ save his followers? And Prabhupada said, because they were so degraded. They were 10th class. They were very degraded people. And I still didn't get it, because I was just equating. I was thinking, pure devotee, there's one. They're the same. Prabhupada's the same as Christ. And, if we came so much later and we were so much more degraded, how come Prabhupada could save us? So I asked another question, but it just happened to be exactly the same words. But Srila Prabhupada, how come Jesus Christ couldn't save his followers? So, now we're really close, right? Right at the corner of his desk, and Prabhupada looks over at me and gives me a look like you want to teach a 2-year-old how to add, but it's way above their head. That's the look I got from Srila Prabhupada. And he said, if somebody's a murderer, he's not a very good person, is he? And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. He said, they were murderers. They were 10th class. And so Rohini Kumar, I think his name is, Rohini. We used to call him Baladev. Anyway, he was there, and he said, Jai, all glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. You are so great that even though we were so much more fallen, you saved us. You are great, Srila Prabhupada, because you saved us. And everyone went, Jai, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, no, I am not so great. It is this Hare Krishna mantra that is great. So then Shruti Kirti said, Jai Srila Prabhupada, you are so great because you have brought us this Hare Krishna mantra. And this Hare Krishna mantra has saved us. And you are so great because you have brought us that. And I saw Srila Prabhupada's cheeks get red. I saw them. They got red. He blushed. And he looked down. He said, oh, that may be so. It was so beautiful, his humility. His expression of, which I never would have caught that in the back of the room, you know. I probably wouldn't even have heard those words. But anyway, he said, oh, that may be so. And then a kirtan had started in the background noise. And Srila Kirti said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, it's time for you to get ready for your class because the evening artik has started. Now it's time for you to get ready. So we knew that's the cue. We have to leave now. So we all immediately paid our obeisances. And Prabhupada said, just a moment, a little Bhagavatam. And he had a low bookshelf next to his desk. And he reached over, without looking, reached over and what appeared to be random, picked out a book at random, and what appeared to be more random, opened the book, and he said, you see, it says right here. And it was Kapila Dev instructing Devahuti, you know, third canto, fourth part, about how even one of a low birth, you know, born in a dog-eater family, if they've chanted Hare Krishna, they become eligible to perform sacrifices. So he was saying that. And years later, Kridananda Maharaj said that Prabhupada specifically said that for me after that pujari's have to be replaced incident. He said, he was saying that for you, just to encourage you. Anyway, it was a beautiful moment.
So in Los Angeles, Srila Prabhupada was giving one lecture, and he talked about how in India there was a grandmother who had a very nice temple within the home. And she was very disappointed that the family members, mainly the children and the grandchildren, were not attending Mangal Artik. He said, so she decided to impose a fine upon the family members and told them whoever does not attend Mangal Artik, they have to pay a fine of a certain amount. So then Prabhupada said, so, he said, for anyone who isn't coming to Mangal Artik, your fine will be to distribute one set of Krishna books. Is that all right? And everybody went, Jai! Yes, Srila Prabhupada! So I lived a few blocks away from the temple, and I couldn't make it to Mangal Artik with my 2 children, but I would carry a set of the small Krishna books with me, and I would think, if I ever meet anyone, I'll try my very best to distribute a set of Krishna books, because in this way I will be paying the fine and Prabhupada will be pleased. So that was a very nice story that I always remembered from a lecture.
And then finally Prabhupada comes to Delhi from Vrindavan. And I was cooking for Prabhupada. And well, before the cooking, I have to tell you how I dressed the deities, because there was a fan that went right on the deities. And I don't know what I was thinking of. I was thinking, oh, you know, I don't want Krishna's peacock feather to fall, or this or that, or the hair. So I moved the fan off the deities to the side. And Prabhupada came like 10 o'clock in the morning. He offered his obeisances, and he walked through the temple room, by the kitchen, the courtyard, and then his room was there. So then I cooked for Prabhupada, and I was really like so conscious. You know when you're doing right, you know when you're really conscious of what you're doing. And I think it was Shruti Kirti, he came back, he says, oh, Prabhupada says the rice isn't cooked. And I thought, no, that's not possible, you know. I mean, I knew I did it exactly right, but, you know, well. So then he came back to get another chapati. And then he says, oh, Prabhupada just hasn't had good quality rice in a long time. In Vrindavan, he had very poor quality. So this is very nice quality. It's very good, he said. So anyway, Prabhupada, you know, I knew it was good and Prabhupada appreciated the prasadam. But that evening I did Artik. And before I was doing Artik, I'd look and I'd see Prabhupada in his room, and he had his glasses on and he had his books, and there was always a special absorption, I guess, a special mood when Prabhupada would be reading the scriptures. And then I finished Artik, I was washing the Artik thing, and I see Prabhupada pass by. And we had a little tiny dinky Vyasasan. I mean, I didn't think Prabhupada would ever sit on it, but Prabhupada sat down on it. And so I finished what I was doing, and we were 6 or 8 devotees, not a lot. And the first thing Prabhupada says is, Krishna is feeling hot. And I thought, oh my God, how does Prabhupada know, you know? He said something about the fan isn't cooling or something. And so he gave a whole lecture on Krishna, the deity, is Krishna himself. And as soon as I could, I put the fan back on Krishna. And I realized, you know, Krishna is personally present with Prabhupada and speaks with him and tells him things. And, you know, it was a real eye-opener for me.
So my at the time husband, he was Kanupriya Das. He went and studied astrology in London for about 6 months. And when he came back, he began doing astrology charts for devotees. And he decided that he should go and ask Srila Prabhupada's opinion about it. So he went up and he asked Prabhupada. He said, Prabhupada, I learned some astrology and I want to know, is it okay? Can I do charts for devotees? And Prabhupada asked him, oh, you're doing astrology. So can you tell me, when will the date be? We will buy our new building for the New York temple. And of course he said, no, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, that is because you have to study Hori astrology. He said, that's mathematics, and it takes at least 10 years to learn it. He said, my Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was very learned astrologer, and he was the last bona fide living astrologer on this planet. So he said, with doing astrology charts for devotees, you can sometimes see the future. He said, but our philosophy is, whatever will be, will be. We simply chant, Hare Krishna. So best you do not do astrology charts for devotees, because they will start worshiping astrology and forget about Krishna. This was in 1975, and my then husband and his friend who he had taught astrology to, Jamadagni, and his other friend, Rebati Nandan, who had been a Swami, they were all studying astrology. And basically Jamadagni and Kanupriya, they wanted Rebati Nandana to take them up to have a meeting with Srila Prabhupada to discuss some questions that they had. So the meeting was arranged. Rebati Nandana took them up to Srila Prabhupada's room, and they brought a cassette recorder with them to record the entire conversation, because they believed that this would be a historical moment in ISKCON, which was going to change and revolutionize everything. So they asked challenging questions to Srila Prabhupada. Things such as, the one devotee said, well, Srila Prabhupada, you said we should follow our GBC. My GBC in Hawaii is a homosexual. Does that mean that if he wants me to engage in homosexual activities, I should? And Prabhupada said, what is this homosex? And someone else that was in the room tried to explain what the devotee was getting at. And Prabhupada still, what is this homosex? And it didn't really continue out. Prabhupada wasn't comfortable. I listened to the tape afterwards. Prabhupada just dismissed it. It was not pleasant. then they ask questions like, well, Srila Prabhupada, you say in Krishna book or the battles or in the battle of Kurukshetra, there were 600 million warriors. What did they do for toilets? Prabhupada just, he didn't say anything. I mean, you can imagine, Jagat Guru, how's he going to respond? Anyway, then there were more questions asked. I can't remember everything, but then they begin to say, well, Srila Prabhupada, do we have to follow a GBC? Can we live outside and follow the principles and read your books and still be devotees? And it went on like that. Then finally, Srila Prabhupada understood their hearts and their minds, what they were getting at. They had grown long hair, and Kenny, he had a big beard, and they had given themselves astrologer names, Shambhu, Indra, and Vyas. So Prabhupada then said to them, actually, you are more advanced than I am. You do not need a guru, but I do. Therefore, you should go out into the material world and enjoy. You are no longer my disciples. And they were right. It was a historical moment. It was showing that we have free will. And if you don't want to worship and follow a spiritual master's instructions, you can do that. So it was a really, it was a horrible time for me. But you know, that was Srila Prabhupada's mercy, because they would have continued committing horrible, horrible offenses. So in one sense, it was very painful, but Prabhupada didn't have to take on the karmic reactions for what the future sinful activities were going to reap.
Prabhupada came 2 or 3 times to Delhi while I was there during that 9 months. One time he came and Malati was also there, and etiquette, if I'd followed Vaishnava etiquette, I should have said, Malati, will you cook for Prabhupada? And I don't know whether, you know, whether I was just selfish and wanted the service, but I didn't do that. And all the while that I was cooking, I was plagued by the idea I should have asked Malati. But in other ways, Malati went in to see Prabhupada with Madeira. One thing, that was after Shamsundar had left, and Prabhupada, he personally took money out and he gave to Malati. He said, buy yourself a nice sari, and he was concerned about Shamsundar, asked questions and things. And also, they took in Madeira's baby. And Madeira had a funny relationship with her husband, Tejas. They were always at odds with each other. And so Madeira thought, well, my baby will get the name Vrindavaneshwari or some nice Vrindavan name. So Prabhupada, he said, she will be called Tejasini, which was her husband's name plus the ini at the end that made it a girl's name, which was funny. It was kind of funny.
I would say Prabhupada's instruction that more important than Vapu, the physical association, is Vani. And that, I believe, is what has kept me inspired in my devotional service for all these years. When I was a devotee of 1 month, I went to New Vrindavan for the Janmashtami festival. And it was at that time that there was the sannyasis there were giving some wrong information about the philosophy. And I remember everyone, including myself, I was very bewildered about the philosophy that they were speaking. And so I reflected on it and I thought, but that's not my understanding of what Prabhupada's saying in his books. I believe it was the Nectar of Devotion where Prabhupada was talking about how the spiritual master is to be honored as good as God. And I remember even asking the sannyasis during this discussion in the temple room, well, does that mean that all the spiritual masters in the disciplic succession are God? And there was not an answer for the question, and so I had to reflect within my own self, what did that mean to me, what Prabhupada said in the Nectar of Devotion? So I came to the conclusion that no, the spiritual master, the pure devotee, is to be honored as good as God, because in quality he's as good as God, but he's different from God, just like what Prabhupada said, you know, we're simultaneously one and yet different from Krishna. So the philosophy, Prabhupada's books, has always been my main inspiration. That and praying to Prabhupada for guidance, because sometimes there's so many different things that are said or done that can lead one to be confused. But Prabhupada has said, I'm always with you. I'm always with you in my teachings and in prayer. I'm always with you. So if we sometimes feel confused by different things that are said or done, we can always go to Prabhupada's books or pray to Prabhupada for clarity. And so that's been my inspiration.
So the quality, or the qualities that most strike me about Srila Prabhupada, it's not just one that stands out, but particularly his purity, his strength of character, and his determination. But his determination to spread Krishna consciousness all around the world, but his determination to save us. You know, hone in on each one of us. He never gave up on us. We were so incompetent in so many ways, and we demonstrated it innumerable times in front of him. And he very rarely was discouraged by that. He always thought of a way to, even if he had to give his chastisement like he did to me and others at different times, still, that's not where he left you. He never left you hopeless. He might have brought out a feeling of hopelessness, but then that desire to gain the highest hope from that. Somehow or other, it inspired hope in you. It didn't leave you on the ground. Prabhupada never left you alone, and never to this day do you feel that, left alone. You feel you have the highest guidance, you have the most qualified guide that's there, the dearest friend, and the one who's encouraging you the most to reach the highest, come to the highest platform. So Prabhupada had that determination to spread Krishna consciousness all around the world, but not without a personal relationship with every single person that he came, every single disciple, every single person that he came in contact with. And you feel that and experience that even today when we read his books, and there might be a question that comes up in the in the group or in the audience, and then you just read a little bit more, and oh, there's the answer, because he's always there, hearing and reciprocating with us. So I find that most encouraging about Srila Prabhupada.
We were doing Sankirtan in Western France, and Bhagavan issued an edict, no devotees can go to England, no devotees can go see Prabhupada. But the German devotees, of course, were there. They went everywhere where Prabhupada was. Hansaduta always made sure that they got Prabhupada's association. So my husband and I were doing Sankirtan, northwestern France, down below England. We finished all our books, we finished all our records. It's Saturday about 11 o'clock in the morning. He says, come on, we're going to England. So we got on a boat. We took 4 or 5 hours. We got finally to the manor. It's evening time, and they say, well, you know, Prabhupada's not coming down usually. You know, he's had an operation. He hasn't been down for a week even. And then there was no way we were going to ask, can we please go inside? And, we just didn't do those kind of things. So the next morning after Mangal Artik, I was saying my Gayatri in the woman's japa room, which is next to the temple, and just below the room where Prabhupada is. And there was a picture of Prabhupada, and I'm saying my Gayatri, and I am praying with every inch of my being. I wanted to see Prabhupada. Needed to see Prabhupada. Anyway, I finished my Gayatri, and then there's just like rustle. It's like a transcendental something, and something has changed. And so they said, oh, Prabhupada's going to come down this morning. But it won't be till like 9 or 9:30. So Ganga and Nanda, they would always go out and find roses to make garlands for Prabhupada. They said, oh, Aditi, would you like to make a garland for Prabhupada? So I said, oh, yes. So you had to make it petal by petal. You couldn't put a whole rose. They were too heavy for him, just one little petal at a time. So all during class, I'm shaking and making that garland. And so about 9:30, they bring Prabhupada down on a palanquin. And it was kind of a mixture of ecstasy to see Prabhupada and great sadness, because he's very thin, his feet are swollen, and he's on the palanquin, and they place him on the Vyasasana, and we have Guru Puj, but there's this heaviness about everything, and not a word was spoken except Jai Prabhupada, like that, and Prabhupada the whole time he was like this. And afterwards they, take him off the Vyasasana, and we're all chanting Jai Prabhupada, and we're also like this, and everybody's crying, Prabhupada and us too. And then he goes back up backwards, so we see him back up to his room. And I didn't know it, but that was the last time. And it was like saying goodbye. Goodbye and thank you. Oh, but Prabhupada isn't limited to his physical body, and that's, thank goodness, because Prabhupada, I see he's in his books, and I see his instruction in his books were never different than what he said in his darshans or his classes. And he also comes in dreams, and I heard once that a devotee once in New Vrindavan, Prabhupada was there, and she said, oh, Prabhupada, I had a dream about you. And he said, when I'm here, you take instruction from me directly, but once I have left, then I can come to you in dreams. So I had one wonderful dream. I've had many dreams, but one in particular that was really wonderful was when I was thinking again, there isn't a temple in Geneva, I should try to do something in Geneva, and so I went, just trusting that things would work out. And at one point I was visiting these devotees on the top of this mountain that we climbed to get there. And in the dream, I must have been reading Shruti Kirti's book about slipping shoes on Prabhupada's feet. So in the dream, I'm in front of a huge Vyasasana, and I don't see Prabhupada, but I just see his feet. And I slip on one slipper, and then all at once Prabhupada leans over and he looks at me, and I look up and he said, will you please buy me some nice socks? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. And then I slipped the other shoe on, and then I went away, and it was amazing because after that I went to a few temples, and devotees would have their chaddars and their socks, and then I'd see Prabhupada, the Murti of Prabhupada, without socks, and I'd think, I would say something and they'd say, oh, it's not winter time yet, but everybody's wearing, Prabhupada's here, He would like to have some warm socks too, Anyway, that's, so, and when I hear devotees talk about people who never saw Prabhupada, sincere devotees who are serving Prabhupada, when they talk about their dreams, I understand Prabhupada has come to them, and he's reciprocating with them.
Je anilo premadana karuna prachu. Jai Anilo